task force called to order at 4:35 on Thursday, March 29th, 2012. Ms. Osprey, would you call the first item on the, or would you call the roll, please?
Member Snyder, absent. Member Nee,
Here.
Member Wolf, Member Johnson,
Here.
Chair Washburn.
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right. We have a very focused agenda today, but are there any changes? I wanted to make note that we'll be having...
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Chair Washburn?
Yeah.
I'd like to make a motion to excuse Member Wolf, who is not returning to regular meetings until April.
Okay.
Second.
He's recovering.
Okay. Is there public comment on the motion?
Yes, there is. My name is Jason Grant Garza, and unfortunately I have been here many, many times, and the failure of my proper handling and the only person who's out, since no one else cares, I think that this should be not allowed. Thank you.
Is there additional public comment on the matter?
Good evening, Thomas Piccarello. You know, I reviewed your bylaws that you passed last year. And your absentee policy, I think, provides 3 absences, and then you send a letter to the Board of Supervisors. I didn't see any distinction between excused and non-excused absences. You certainly have a lot of members who have exceeded the 3 per 12 months absences. So I'd like to see you enforce your bylaws. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there additional public comment on the motion? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Osprey, would you call the roll, please?
Member Nee,
Aye.
Member Johnson,
Yes.
Chair Washburn.
Aye.
Motion, it passes.
Ms. Osprey, would you call the next item on the agenda?
Item number 2, next steps on Ethics Commission's proposed policy for handling sunshine-related complaints.
All right, so this is the primary purpose for calling this meeting. We now have a date for the joint meeting between the Ethics Commission and this committee of the task force. That meeting will happen on Friday, April 13th at, I'm forgetting the time. 2 o'clock. And so we, at the last meeting of this committee, decided to meet today in order to discuss actually strategies for that meeting. We also have been given some materials from Mr. Grossman about the specific matters that we'll be talking about. So that's why we're here, and I'd like to hear from my fellow members here about ideas for how to proceed. We've scheduled 30 minutes for this discussion. Member Johnson?
There was another person that was going to be reviewing our materials. Did that happen? Can we ask Mr. Grossman?
Oh, I believe that was Oliver Luby.
You have a question for me?
Yeah. Did you receive any response from Mr. Luby, who was reviewing the materials?
Oh, yes. I did, in fact. And Oliver had very little to add in terms of the analytics side of it. He suggested, however, that I include a reference to the constitutional provision, Prop 59, right up front, because that's what we're talking about from the get-go. And he had, I forgot what the other ones were, but I did make some changes, and the memo that went out reflects that, the last one that I think went with the notice of the meeting.
Okay.
Is that the one that's in the packet?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, I'm wondering if it would be helpful to me, and I'm sure to members of the public, Mr. Grossman, if you could give us an overview of what these different documents are and how we are to regard them. That would be very helpful to me, and
Okay.
I'm sure to everyone else.
Okay. Well, as you probably have figured by now, the big elephant in the room is the staff's abrupt change from the decisions made to almost 2 years ago by the Ethics Commission in terms of its jurisdiction. At a meeting in June of 2010, the Commission basically included, as part of its jurisdiction, enforcement of referrals from the task force. And the only question is exactly how those enforcements would be handled. Would they be treated de novo as, you know, start from scratch and both parties would make their cases? Would it be treated presumptively as a determination which the respondent had to rebut? Or would it be a show cause kind of thing where the respondent would have to show cause or prove there's a reason why it shouldn't be enforced? And those subjects actually were very thoroughly discussed. If you look at the minutes of the meeting, which I brought with, they consume 6 pages of, 5 pages actually, of small text. And the meeting started at 5:36, it ended at 8:32. So they spent almost 3 hours on these decisions that were made. And the task force, quite rightly, in looking at the set of regulations that had been produced at that time, after that meeting, assumed that the jurisdictional aspect had been included, and it was. And so the task force responded with work, a memo, and a kind of a redraft of those regulations, and there it sat for about 3 months in last spring. I guess May maybe, and then in November, Mr. St. Croix and his crew came up with this bombshell, which was, well, we're not going to take jurisdiction of the referrals at all. We're only going to handle willful violations under Section 6734, because that's the only place where the Ethics Commission is given the power to enforce the ordinance. So what we went back was further back than June of 2010, actually. We are now somewhere in Never Never Land. So given that state and the fact that we don't have our own, I mean, the task force doesn't have a city attorney to do the work, and Mr. Snyder opted out of doing it. And because of my proactive nature, I prepared a couple of memoranda. The first one was a memoranda which dealt solely with this issue of jurisdiction, because that's the heart of it. Because without that, you may as well just shut your doors, because you won't have any place to go with your referrals. And so and frankly, that's what I would focus on at the meeting. I wouldn't fool around with anything else in their regulations. I would talk just about this. And I would remind them 3 hours was spent on this, and the staff somehow took over something that was never, and articulated a position for the commission that was never discussed in a public meeting, never agendized and never discussed. And it came up, I guess, about 3 or 4 months ago when the regulations that they had proposed showed up, and the commission was all set to go ahead and adopt them. Basically, if a whole bunch of us hadn't showed up and were pounding the table and saying, you can't do this. So where we are really, I think, is to focus on the memo, make sure it's pretty much what we want to say, but make it clear to the commissioners that they better read this stuff, because it's absolutely clear to me that they are being led around by the nose by Mr. St. Croix, because how else could this happen? Is there no institutional memory? After all, Ben-Hur and Smedley were deeply involved in those discussions at the meeting in June of 2010. What happened? You know, I have an excuse for not remembering, you know, age. They don't. So that's one thing I would focus on, the fact